Alright, today I've got a victory denied crisis at Smolensk on the table, covering the German operations in Russia from July to September 1941. And just to kind of show off the board real quick, see if I can get a high angle of this. So there's the game map. Beautiful looking game map. I quite enjoy it. And all the starting pieces. I've got everything set up here for to play the game. Down here we have the turn track, starting at June 10th. We've got 8 turns in this game. That's extendable to 10 depending on certain things that might happen in the game. So you've got September 1941 there. So if you end up having to go after Moscow, you get an extra 2 turns in this game to do it. And we've sort of got the starting points for all of our pieces. Here we have 3rd Panzer Group up north, our strong mechanized units, and 2nd Panzer Group down south. Now these guys, of course, are all part of Army Group Center, and there's Smolensk, a key city on the map. Germans wanted to capture this city because it was the highway, or along the highway to Moscow, which is over here on the edge of the map. Okay. So, what's the objective of the game? Well, to win. But how do you win the game? Well, if you're the Germans, what you want to do is, there's an auto-win victory, or condition. If the Germans are able to introduce a combat unit into one of these 3 Moscow hexes, the Germans automatically win. But as you can see, they'd have quite a ways to go in order to get there, so that probably is going to be difficult to do. There's an auto-win condition for the Russians, and that's over here on the left side of the map, called the Minsk Pocket right there. I'll talk more about what the Minsk Pocket is later when it comes up in play, but in short, if the Russian player is able to get a combat unit into the Minsk Pocket, just walk across into one of these hexes, it's an auto-win victory for the Russians. Now, if neither of those conditions are met before the end of the game, what happens is you are going to end up comparing victory points. And what are victory points? Well, on the map, we've got these victory point chits. There are gold-colored ones, and there are silver-colored ones. And there are places on the map that require a particular type of VP chit to be placed in there. On the back sides of these chits, there are integer values ranging from 0 to, 4 maybe for the gray ones, and 0 to some higher number for the gold ones. So the gold ones are certainly worth more than the silver ones. And as the German player, of course, what you want to do is you want to capture as many of these VP chits as possible. So just by taking a city, you get that particular chit. Now, the German player certainly doesn't get to look at the value of the chit, the VP chit that they get. All they get to do is they get to place it into this victory chit box, and at the end of the game it can be revealed. There's an exception to that rule, but it's sort of a special condition that I won't get into right now. But for the most part, the Germans cannot ever know the values of the VPs that they're getting until the end of the game. And that's kind of a good thing, because if the Germans acquire enough VPs in the game, and they know that they've acquired enough, the Germans can go on the defensive and not really play the game properly anymore. So I like the fact that the German player really doesn't know how many victory points they have at any particular time, and so it motivates them to keep moving forward, to keep the offensive, and to gain as many of these VP chits as possible. Soviets, they get victory points too, based upon VPs that weren't captured. There's a couple of other ways. They also earn victory points by eliminating these motorized units on the map. So those are worth something. So as the German player, you want to make sure that you're not losing your motorized divisions, things like that. So there's sort of the situation up north. Not much resistance on the front lines here. Situation down south. I'm just trying to expose the map here, and I really want to get into the driving mechanic of this game. And so we've got these chits down here, and you'll notice that a lot of these chits have gold lettering on them. These are not the only ones in the game. These are just ones that I kind of have set out right now. There are more of these for the Germans, and there are plenty more up here for the Russians. And so this is a chit pool game. What does that mean? Well, this game does not have a series of well-defined phases as far as the ordering of the phases go. This game relies on a chit pool system. And so we've got a reinforcement phase, we've got a supply phase, we've got this air power phase, and we've got a whole bunch of other chits here. And what happens is you throw a certain number and certain types of chips into a cup. So all of these right here, or most of these, would end up going to the cup at the beginning of the game. And what you do is you randomly draw these chits. And so in many war games, we know that, maybe segment 6 is going to be the reinforcement phase, and maybe segment 8 is the supply phase. And you would have that order of phases every single game. Well, in this game, it's not like that. In this game, when you start a turn, you're going to pull a chit out of this cup. And whatever chit you happen to pull at that particular time is going to dictate what phase is going to occur. So for instance, we've got all these chits in the cup, and you're playing the game at a particular point in time, maybe it's turn 5, and you pull the reinforcement chit. Well, the first phase of that turn 5 is going to be the reinforcement phase. But in turn 6, maybe the reinforcement chit doesn't get pulled until maybe the 6th time a player has gone, and then you want to get your reinforcements until near the end of turn 6. And so I really like this mechanic of the game because, for one, it allows for a different game every time you play, and two, you really have to. You never know. You never really know what's coming next, and so you have to sort of keep all of these different options in mind as you're taking your turn. Now, what are these other chits? So reinforcement phase, that's pretty self-explanatory. Supply phase, air power. Okay, when this chit is pulled, this air power chit, the German player is allowed to take one of their Stuka units, and if you have a Stuka unit that's on the used side, you get to flip it to its unused side. And the Germans start the game with 3 unused Stuka units, representing or sort of abstracting the air power of the Luftwaffe. And so these Stuka units can be used once per combat. And by introducing a Stuka unit into combat, the German player would gain a beneficial column shift of 2 columns on our combat results table. So, for instance, if the Germans were attacking and we were at a 5-to-1 on the odds ratio for that particular combat, the German player might decide to use an unused Stuka unit in that battle, and that would bump them up to a 7-to-1 column on their offensive action that they're taking. Stuka units can also be used when defending. So if the German player was being attacked and then they were on maybe a 2-to-1, by introducing a Stuka unit, that would benefit, or that would give the Germans a column shift, 2 column shifts to the left on this table, giving them a benefit. So the air power chit allows the German player to sort of regenerate the use of one of their Stukas, and this would appear once per turn in the game. Now these other chits are sort of interesting. The Russian player has these command chits here, and they've got some sort of identification number on them, so 20A and 13A. These represent, or these allow the Russian player to activate a particular headquarter unit on the map. So for instance, if the Russian player, or if a player drew this chit, then the Russian player would be able to perform their actions for the upcoming phase. So if the 20th Army headquarters chit was pulled, then what the Russian player would do is they would go to the map and try to locate the 20th Army HQ. And there it is. And so the way this activation works is this. You've got 2 numbers on an HQ unit. You've got the number on the left and the number on the right. The number on the right just tells you how far that HQ can move in a particular turn. The number on the left tells you the command range in hexes of that HQ unit. So what does that mean, the command range? Well, here we see a 4. So any combat unit within 4 hexes of this particular activated HQ would also be activated, meaning that, for instance, here we have 5th Mechanized Corps here. It's within 4 hexes of 20th Army. This unit would be allowed to move. It would be allowed to perform combat, things like that, because it's within the command range of this particular HQ. Something else is that you can chain activations of HQs. So if we look up here, we see 19th Army HQ within 4 hexes of the activated 20th Army HQ. And because this is within 4 hexes, in turn, this HQ is also activated, which means then that any unit within this particular headquarters command range, which again is 4, such as this infantry corps right here, would be activated and would be allowed to move as well. So this is how Russian players this is what decides what Russian units would be able to move in a particular turn based upon how this activation mechanism works, which is really interesting. You're not able to just move all of your units on your turn in your sort of typical war game approach. This game has this random sort of element to it, and what's really interesting is that it really causes you as a player to think about where you're going to position your units on the map, because if you want to maximize your ability to move things on the board, you want to make sure that you've got HQs in range of your units or within other HQs on the map. Okay, now the Germans, their command chits some of them are slightly different than what the Russians get. So you've got the German 9th Army command chit, and this behaves just like a regular command chit for a Russian unit or Russian HQ. The 9th Army command chit will activate any German headquarters unit on the map. And the Germans start the game with one of those. And if you notice here, it actually has, these German HQs have a larger command range to them over their Russian counterparts. These other guys here, we've got 3rd Panzer Group, 2nd Panzer Group, and Guderian. Now these are a little bit different. 3rd Panzer Group command chit will allow the activation of these motorized units or these armored divisions up here that have sort of the dark black tops to them and the light gray bottoms. So anytime you see a unit with this color scheme on it, that's 3rd Panzer Group. And they start up sort of in the northern area of the map. The way this works is there are 2 Panzer Corps in 3rd Panzer Group. You've got the ones with the green bands on them, and you have the ones with the purple bands on them. And the way this works is when the German player pulls the 3rd Panzer Group command chit, they are able to activate both groups, the green group and the purple group. Now there's a rule that you have to follow. If the German player decides they want to activate, say, this particular unit right here, 14th Motorized Division, any other sort of green marker, so any of these other units that have the green bands on them, that are within 3 hexes of the unit that I'm activating, would be activated as well. And you would chain these together. So if I were to activate the 14th Motorized Division, 7th Panzer is within 3 hexes, 12th Panzer is within 3 hexes, 20th Panzer is within 3 hexes. All of these units would be activated to move or perform combat. The same sort of concept applies up here. If I were to activate 19th Panzer as well, this is a purple unit, I would be able to activate any other purple unit within 3 hexes of 19th Panzer. However, I can chain these together. So if 18th Motorized Division becomes activated due to 19th Panzer being activated, they're within 3 hexes, 1, 2, 3, then this motorized division here would also be activated because it is within 3 hexes of 18th Motorized Division. And the same would apply to these guys in the south. You would notice the color scheme is a little bit different. It has a light gray top to it with the black bottoms, and we've got 3 different Panzer Corps. We've got the yellow, the blue, and the red, all a part of Second Army. So these guys down here are part of this, or the Second Panzer Group is what these guys belong to. Okay, that's this guy right here. Okay, so what is the Guderian chit? The Guderian chit's very interesting in its ability. Imagine the Guderian chit as being sort of the trump card in the game. Let's say that you're playing out a turn and you're the German player, and you know these chits are in the cup, or some number of them are, and let's say that at some point the supply chit gets drawn, and so you would normally go ahead and perform your supply phase. But let's say you're the German player and you have Guderian, this particular counter in play, which sits over here in the box should you choose to pick it. And let's say as the German player, you don't want the supply phase to occur at that particular point in time. What you can do is you can trump the chit that was drawn, and you would say, nope, I don't want the supply phase to occur right now. I'm going to put that back in the cup, and I'm going to trump that with the Guderian chit, assuming you haven't already played it. And what this command chit does is it activates Second Panzer Group. So the guys in yellow, blue, and red. So it's a really interesting mechanic that the German player gets this sort of ability to take the initiative if a chit is drawn that the German player doesn't want to have in play at the time. So it could be a supply phase that's drawn that could get trumped. It could be a Russian command chit that gets drawn that would be trumped, or it could even be a German command chit that gets drawn, and maybe a Ninth Army chit gets drawn, and the German player is thinking to himself, well, I don't want to activate Ninth Army right at this point in time. You can go ahead and trump it with Guderian. So if that command chit happens to be in play for that turn and you haven't used it yet, you have that ability as the German player. There are some other command chits that we haven't looked at. The Russians get this artillery command chit. It's not in play for the first turn of the game. It goes in there on turn 2 into the mix, and it would be available in the mix from turn 2 through the end of the game. And what this artillery chit allows is for the Russian player to conduct, I forget how many, they roll a die. They roll a die, a 6-sided die, and the number that comes up tells the Russian player how many artillery attacks they get. And so what an artillery attack is any German unit that would happen to be adjacent to a Russian combat unit could be eligible for an artillery attack, only one per turn. If the Russian unit happened to be on a hill, I'm trying to find one on the map here to illustrate what a hill looks like. Okay, right here. If a Russian unit happened to be on a hill, then the range would not be 1 hex, it would be 2 hexes. And so what the Russian player can do is they can perform these artillery attacks on the 3-to-1 column here on the CRT. And if you notice here, the results are going to be all retreats. A German unit won't take a step loss due to this particular type of combat in a 3-to-1 column. However, should a German unit have to retreat through an enemy zone of control, they would, of course, have to take a step loss. Any unit would if they're retreating through enemy zone of control. So that's an interesting ability that the Russians get. We have a couple of other abilities here. We've got this rocket attack. So every game, the Russian player gets to perform 1 rocket attack for the entire game. And when they perform the rocket attack, it automatically gives them the ability to roll on a 7-to-1 column for that particular rocket attack. And I don't believe that is able to be combined with some sort of land-based combat. That's sort of its own thing. And so here, of course, you can see that losses would be taken, or very likely be taken here on the, according to the CRT, we've got a 1 DR2. That indicates that should that number be rolled with the die, the unit would take 1 step loss and then have to retreat 2 hexes. 2 DR2, that's 2 step losses, and retreat 2 hexes. So that's a very powerful ability. The Germans get one of these as well. It's the bomber, and so they get to roll on an 8-to-1. And again, this is a one-time ability in the game where the German player can bust this out and say, okay, I'm going to hit a hex. whatever hex it happens to be, and they get to roll in this 8-1 column. This little superscript here, 1, leads us to a footnote that says that you ignore all retreat results. So, if you were to roll a 2 as the German, the Russian would have to take 1 step loss, but they wouldn't have to retreat or anything like that. So that's another special ability that the German player gets in this game. So when you start the game, turn 1, there's a special rule for the first, or for the opening phases in this game for turn 1. The second Panzer group gets to go first. Always, that will never change. And so all these guys would be activated. Following that would be 3rd Panzer Group. They get to go second. That will never change as well. Another rule about the opening 2 phases of this game is that you can't move any pieces. You would have to jump straight to combat, which means, okay, for the opening phase, it's sort of a no-brainer. You can only initiate combat with units that would be adjacent to whatever unit you happen to have on the board. So, the opening moves are pretty straightforward, I would imagine. You can make some choices down in here, but other than that, there's not much more you can do. Something else too, the Germans get on the first 2 phases of the game, they get a beneficial CRT shift 2 columns to the right on every attack that they do. So that's pretty powerful. You want to take advantage of that, because the higher the odds, of course. Everybody here mostly is attuned with wargaming. The higher the odds ratio, the better results you'll get for that particular combat. So that's something that the German player, of course, wants to make use of, is that 2-column shift. And what's interesting is, and I think I might have misspoken, is that 2-column shift to the right stays in play for the entire first turn, not just the 2 phases. So the entire first turn, the Germans get that bonus that the Russians don't get. Something else too. In the first turn, when the reinforcement shit is drawn, and there's things that you have to do when the reinforcement shit is drawn for every turn, and we can get into that later. But this applies to turn 1. When this is drawn in turn 1, the Russians get to activate all of these guys down here, sort of in the south. So these infantry corps are moving up from the south. They would appear down here on the southern end of the map, and that would pose a threat to the German southern flank. And of course, something else to think about is that Russian auto-win condition, where if the Russian player can get a unit into the Minsk pocket, that's an auto-win for them. So that's something for the Germans to keep in mind, is that these units will come on the map in turn 1. As soon as that reinforcement chit is drawn, and this command chit right here for Timoshenko would be thrown immediately into the cup. So that's an interesting little mechanic there as well. There's a whole bunch of other things that we can get into, but we will cover them as we get into this game. For now, I think that was a pretty good overview of what's going to happen. I tried shooting this video the other day, and I made quite a few mistakes. One of them being, and I won't forget again, is the terrain effects chart over here. So the different types of terrain will, of course, affect your movement. But what I was forgetting here was the effect on combat, and so I was missing some of these river effects and things like that. It really kind of tilted the game. So I've decided to start over and shoot this one more time. Let me get this guy out of here. So to start the game, we have to get our command chits in the cup. And so every single turn you would have the reinforcement chit in there. That's a no-brainer. The supply chit goes in there. Nothing special about that. Air power goes in there. And I think those are the sort of the default ones. The artillery chit doesn't go in until turn 2, so I'll get rid of that. And now, here's sort of where the really cool fog of war comes into play. The Russian player gets to choose 2 different command chits to place in the cup at the beginning of the game. Since I'm playing myself, of course I know what these chits are going to be, but if you're playing your opponent, the German player wouldn't know what 2 you picked. In fact, they'll never know which ones you're throwing into the cup at the beginning of each turn, because they're not allowed to look. They would only know once they get drawn. And there's a whole bunch of different choices up here, depending on what HQs are already on the map and which ones aren't. So that adds an element of fog of war into the game, because the German player won't know what the Russian is wanting to activate for that particular turn. So I've gone ahead and I've chosen the 13th Army and 20th Army, and the reason for that is because here's 13th Army. You get a huge amount of activations just by having that command chit in the cup. All these guys would potentially be able to be activated because, well, we've got another HQ here that's within 4 hexes, and all these guys would be able to go. Same story up here. We've got 20th Army headquarters here, which would in fact activate this guy, and all these units would be activated. So it's sort of a no-brainer. I think having our frontline units being able to actually do something like run away or whatever. So we're going to go ahead and put those into the cup. And then finally, the German player gets to choose, I believe, two command chits to put into the cup on the opening turn. I'm going to verify this real quick. But I think I'm going to go with, I'm certainly going to go with Guderian. I think that having that sort of trump ability in play is very important. The German player then selects 3 command chits. 3 command chits. Okay, so the German player gets 3 for the first turn. So I'm going to set Guderian over here. That counts as 1. And I'm going to do what I did before. I'm going to go with 9th Army and 3rd Panzer Group. Should I go with 3rd Panzer Group? All right, I'm not going to waste much time eating up this video with me thinking. But what I want to be able to do is, first of all, I know that 2nd Panzer Group is going to be able to move right off the bat. They move first on the opening turn. And so that's one activation for them. We know that 3rd Panzer Group gets to be activated immediately following that. And so that doesn't change as well. They're going to be able to move. And so we've got all of our mech units in play for turn 1. So I've selected Guderian, and that will allow me to activate yet again 2nd Panzer Group. So they're going to be able to move twice in the first turn. And by throwing in 3rd Panzer Group command chit as well, these guys up north are going to be able to move twice in the first turn, which is great. I want to get my mechanized units moving and using that combat bonus early on. As you can tell, our mech units are very strong. The first value on the left is the attack factor. The middle value is the defense factor. The third value is the movement factor. And if you notice, actually, the tanks are very powerful offensively, but they don't do too well on the defense. So you need to make sure that you stack them with something like a motorized infantry division or regular infantry to make sure that they're not sort of caught out in the open. And then 9th Army I threw into the cup in order to be able to activate my infantry divisions here up north to move them forward in order to partake in any sort of cleanup operation I might run into in the first turn.